Charles Whitmore stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a conquered kingdom. 43 floors below, tiny figures moved through streets he practically owned. His empire stretched across 3 continents, his name carved into steel and glass monuments that pierced the sky. Yet for all his power, all his wealth, all his influence over thousands of lives, he could not coax a single word from the one person who mattered most. Emma Elizabeth Whitmore was 6 years old and had never spoken a word. Not mama, not papa, not even a simple yes or no. She existed in a world of profound silence that no amount of money could penetrate, no expert could explain, no therapy could breach. Charles had built his fortune on solving impossible problems, negotiating deals that others called hopeless, turning failures into triumphs. But his daughter remained his greatest mystery, his most devastating defeat. The morning had started like every other for the past 3 years. Margaret, his wife, had whispered prayers over Emma's breakfast, hoping today might be different. Emma had smiled that radiant, soundless smile that broke their hearts daily, spreading jam on her toast with the concentration of a scientist. She was brilliant, that much was clear. Her eyes held intelligence that sparkled like diamonds, curiosity that danced in every glance. She understood everything, responded to commands, laughed at funny faces, and cried at sad movies. But words remained locked away in some unreachable place. Charles remembered the day they first realized something was different. Emma had been 18 months old, well past the age when most children babble their first attempts at language. Margaret had sat on the nursery floor, holding colorful picture books, pointing at cats and dogs and airplanes, waiting for Emma to echo back even the simplest sounds. But Emma would only point, smile, and clap her tiny hands. The silence grew heavier with each passing month. The parade of experts began when Emma turned 2. Dr. Harrison, the city's most renowned pediatrician, had run every test imaginable. Her hearing was perfect. Her vocal cords were healthy and strong. Her brain showed no signs of damage or developmental delays. Physically, she was capable of speech. Mentally, she understood language completely. She simply chose not to use it, though calling it a choice seemed cruel when applied to a child so young. Next came the therapists. Dr. Susan Chun, a specialist in selective mutism, had worked with Emma for 8 months. Her office was filled with toys, games, and activities designed to encourage vocalization. Emma participated eagerly in everything except speaking. She would stack blocks, solve puzzles, draw pictures, and even sing along to songs by humming the melodies. But words remained imprisoned. Margaret began losing weight, dark circles forming under her eyes like bruises. She would sit by Emma's bed at night, reading story after story, hoping that tonight would be the night their daughter would whisper back. Charles found her crying in the kitchen one morning, coffee growing cold in her shaking hands. "What if we never hear her voice?" Margaret had whispered, her words barely audible above Emma's silent laughter from the next room. "What if she goes her whole life without telling us she loves us, without calling me mama even once?" Charles had no answer. He wrapped his arms around his wife, feeling helpless for the first time in his adult life. Outside, construction crews worked on his latest project, their voices carrying through the morning air as they called instructions to each other. The sound of communication, of human connection through words, felt like mockery. They tried everything money could buy. Speech therapists from Johns Hopkins, child psychologists from Harvard, specialists from Switzerland who charged more per hour than most people earned in a month. Each brought hope, then left behind disappointment. Emma would engage with them all, her personality shining through her silence, but words never came. The family's mansion, worth more than most small towns, echoed with a silence that grew heavier each day. 23 rooms filled with the most beautiful furniture, artwork worth millions, and technology that could connect them to anyone in the world. Yet the most important connection, the bond between parents and child through spoken love, remained severed. Charles threw himself deeper into work, building taller buildings, acquiring more companies, as if success in business could somehow balance the failure at home. Margaret volunteered at children's hospitals, finding some comfort in helping other families, while unable to help her own daughter. Emma continued to grow, beautiful and intelligent, communicating through gestures, expressions, and an elaborate system of pointing and nodding that broke their hearts with its complexity. At night, when the business calls ended and the household staff retreated to their quarters, the Whitmore family would sit together in their grand living room. Charles would read financial reports while Margaret worked on her charity foundation paperwork. Emma would play quietly on her elaborate rug, surrounded by toys that most children could only dream of owning. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with love, worry, and unspoken dreams. They were a family bound by devotion, but separated by an invisible wall that all their wealth and influence couldn't tear down. Nobody could have predicted that the key to breaking through that wall would come from the most unexpected source, a man in orange overalls who collected their garbage every Tuesday morning. The crisis struck on a Tuesday morning in late September. Charles was in his home office, engaged in a heated conference call with investors in Tokyo. His voice carried through the house as he negotiated a deal worth $30 million, his tone commanding and absolute. Margaret was in the garden, tending to her roses while keeping one eye on Emma, who played nearby with her collection of colorful stones. The autumn air was crisp, leaves beginning their transformation into gold and crimson. Emma had discovered a butterfly caught in a spider's web near the garden gate. With gentle fingers, she worked to free the struggling creature, her face serious with concentration. This was Emma's way, always rescuing things, always caring, always silent. Margaret turned to gather her gardening tools, her attention diverted for perhaps 30 seconds. When she looked back, Emma was gone. The colorful stones lay scattered on the grass, abandoned. The garden gate, always kept locked, stood open. Margaret's heart stopped. "Emma!" she screamed, her voice tearing through the morning quiet. "Emma!" She ran toward the gate, panic flooding her system like ice water. Her perfect daughter, her silent angel, had vanished into a world that didn't understand her unique needs. Charles's business call ended abruptly. Through his office window, he saw Margaret running frantically around the front yard, calling Emma's name with increasing desperation. He sprinted downstairs, his expensive Italian shoes slipping on the marble floors. "She was right there," Margaret sobbed, pointing toward the garden. "I turned away for 1 second, Charles. 1 second. The gate was locked. I know it was locked." They searched frantically. The pool area empty. The tennis court empty. The guest house empty. Charles's mind raced through horrible possibilities. Kidnappers who knew about his wealth. Predators who targeted vulnerable children. Emma, unable to call for help. Unable to even say her own name if someone asked. Then Charles saw her. His relief was so intense he nearly collapsed. Emma stood on the public sidewalk in front of their property, perfectly safe, but completely captivated by something, or someone. A man in orange overalls was loading a heavy trash bag into his truck, his movements efficient and practiced. He wore work gloves stained with the honest dirt of labor, a safety vest that reflected the morning sun, and a cap that had seen better days. This was Daniel Hayes, though the Whitmores didn't know his name yet. He was 42 years old, had been collecting garbage for the city for 15 years, and lived in a modest apartment with his elderly cat, Chester. His route included the wealthy Maple Heights neighborhood every Tuesday morning. He was invisible to most residents, just another service worker doing an unpleasant job. But Emma saw him differently. She stood perfectly still, studying Daniel with the same intense focus she usually reserved for butterflies and flowers. Her small hands were clasped behind her back, her head tilted at that curious angle that Margaret knew meant Emma was processing something important. "Emma!" Charles called out, relief making his voice sharp. "Come away from there immediately." But Emma didn't move. She was transfixed. Daniel noticed her watching and paused in his work. Instead of ignoring her or telling her to move along like most adults might, he crouched down to her level. His movements were slow, non-threatening, respectful. "Hey there, little princess," he said, his voice warm and gentle. "You're up early this morning, aren't you?" Emma's response was immediate and unprecedented. She smiled, not her usual polite smile, but something radiant and genuine that Margaret had never seen before. Then, impossibly, she giggled. Not the soundless laughter they were accustomed to, but an actual sound that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her. Charles felt his knees go weak. Margaret gripped his arm so tightly her fingernails drew blood through his shirt. Emma had made a sound. Their silent daughter had made a voluntary sound for a complete stranger. "Don't move," Margaret whispered. "Don't breathe. Don't do anything to break this moment." Daniel seemed to understand instinctively that something significant was happening. He didn't push or prod or ask Emma questions. He simply continued talking in his gentle, unhurried way. "You know what I found in someone's trash this morning," he said, settling more comfortably into his crouch. "A teddy bear. Still perfectly good, just needed someone to love it. Made me think about how sometimes the best things get thrown away by mistake." Emma took a step closer, then another. Margaret started crying, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter approach a stranger with more openness than she'd ever shown to family members. "She doesn't do this," Charles said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She doesn't approach people. She barely tolerates the doctors we bring to help her." But Emma was clearly comfortable with Daniel in a way that defied explanation. She pointed at his work gloves, her expression curious. Daniel held up his hands, showing her the worn leather. "These old things? They've been with me for 3 years. They help me pick up heavy stuff without hurting my hands. Kind of like how sometimes we need protection when we're dealing with difficult things." Was he speaking metaphorically? Was this simple garbage collector somehow understanding Emma's situation better than all the expensive experts they consulted? Charles found himself studying the man more carefully. Daniel had kind eyes, weathered hands, and a patience that seemed infinite. He spoke to Emma like she was fully capable of understanding every word, which she was. He didn't talk down to her or use the patronizing tone that many adults employed with children. He treated her like a person worthy of respect and genuine conversation. "I have to keep working now, Princess," Daniel said eventually. "But maybe I'll see you again next Tuesday?" Emma nodded enthusiastically, another breakthrough, as she rarely acknowledged direct questions from anyone. She stepped back as Daniel stood and resumed loading trash bags, but she didn't leave. She remained on the sidewalk, watching his every move with fascination. Charles and Margaret approached cautiously, afraid to shatter whatever spell had been cast. Emma allowed her mother to take her hand, but kept looking back at Daniel until his truck disappeared around the corner. That night, Emma drew her first recognizable picture in years, a stick figure in orange next to their house. The following Tuesday couldn't come fast enough. Charles found himself checking his watch obsessively, something he hadn't done since his early days as a struggling entrepreneur. Margaret had been awake since 5 in the morning, positioning herself by the window with a cup of coffee that grew cold as she watched for the familiar orange truck. Emma sensed the anticipation in the house. She had spent the week carrying around the drawing she'd made of Daniel, showing it to her parents with an excitement they'd never seen before. She'd even added details to it: a sun with crooked rays, flowers along the bottom, and what might have been a cat sitting near the stick figure in orange overalls. At exactly 7:43 in the morning, the garbage truck rumbled down Maple Heights Drive. Emma was at the gate before the engine fully stopped, her small hands gripping the wrought iron bars like a prisoner awaiting freedom. Charles and Margaret followed, maintaining what they hoped was a respectful distance. Daniel climbed down from his truck with the same unhurried movements as the week before. When he spotted Emma, his face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Well, good morning, Princess," he called out. "I was hoping I'd see you again." Emma practically vibrated with excitement. She held up her drawing, pressing it against the gate bars for Daniel to see. He walked over and studied it with the seriousness of an art critic examining a masterpiece. "Is this supposed to be me?" he asked, pointing to the orange figure. Emma nodded eagerly. "And this is your house?" Another nod, more enthusiastic than the first. "And who's this little person right here?" Emma pointed to herself, then to the smaller figure in the drawing. For the first time since her giggle the previous week, she opened her mouth and made a soft sound. Not a word, but definitely an attempt at vocalization. Margaret grabbed Charles's hand so hard he winced. "That's beautiful artwork," Daniel said, his voice warm with appreciation. "You know what? I'm going to think about this picture all week long while I'm working." Charles stepped forward, his business instincts warring with his parental desperation. He wasn't used to being dependent on anyone, especially someone he employed indirectly through city taxes. But Emma's response to this man was undeniable. "Mr. Charles began, realizing he didn't know the garbage collector's name. "Hayes," Daniel supplied easily. "Daniel Hayes. And you're Mr. Whitmore, right? I've been working this route for 8 years. You have a beautiful home." Charles felt oddly ashamed that he'd never bothered to learn the name of someone who had been serving their neighborhood for nearly a decade. "Yes, well, about Emma, my daughter. She doesn't usually. That is, she has some challenges with." "She seems perfect to me," Daniel interrupted gently, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. "Sometimes the best people just need things to be quiet enough to hear themselves think." Margaret stepped forward, tears threatening to spill again. "She hasn't spoken since birth. The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong, but she just won't talk. She's never responded to anyone the way she responds to you." Daniel absorbed this information without the usual adult reactions of pity, excessive concern, or uncomfortable questions. Instead, he crouched down to Emma's level again. "You know what, Princess? I bet you have the most interesting thoughts in that head of yours. Sometimes the people with the most important things to say take their time, finding the right words." Over the following weeks, Tuesday mornings became sacred in the Whitmore household. Business calls were rescheduled. Meetings were moved. Nothing was allowed to interfere with Emma's time with Daniel. The interactions began to evolve. Emma started leaving small gifts by the gate, flowers from Margaret's garden, smooth stones from her collection, even one of her favorite hair ribbons. Daniel treated each offering like a precious treasure, carefully placing them in his shirt pocket and thanking Emma with genuine gratitude. "You know what your flowers did yesterday," Daniel told her one morning. "They made my whole apartment smell like springtime. My cat Chester keeps sniffing around trying to figure out where the good smell is coming from." Emma's silent laughter became more frequent, more natural. She began mimicking Daniel's movements, pretending to lift heavy trash bags, and wiping her forehead dramatically like she was working hard. Daniel encouraged these games, making exaggerated groaning sounds when he lifted real bags, causing Emma to double over with silent giggles. Charles found himself looking forward to these encounters almost as much as Emma did. He began timing his morning routine to coincide with Daniel's arrival, making excuses to be outside checking the mail or inspecting the landscaping. What he observed challenged every assumption he'd made about class, education, and intelligence. Daniel spoke to Emma about everything: the weather, the different types of birds he saw on his route, funny stories about things people threw away. He never talked down to her, never used baby talk, never acted like her silence was a problem to be solved. He simply included her in his world through words, creating a bridge that dozens of expensive specialists had failed to build. "He's teaching her that communication isn't just about talking," Margaret observed one evening as she watched Emma play with a toy garbage truck she'd insisted they buy her. "He's showing her that words can be gifts, not demands." Charles nodded, understanding dawning on him like sunrise. "We've been trying to pull words out of her. He's just giving her words to play with, no strings attached." The breakthrough came in the 4th week. Emma had been particularly animated that morning, clapping her hands and pointing excitedly at everything Daniel did. As he loaded the last bag from their bins, she ran to the gate and pressed her face against the bars. "You're going to miss me, aren't you, Princess?" Daniel said with a smile. Emma opened her mouth, her lips forming shapes that looked almost like words. No sound came out, but the attempt was clear. Daniel waited patiently, his expression encouraging but not pressuring. "That's okay," he said softly. "Sometimes our hearts know things before our voices do." As his truck pulled away, Emma turned to her parents with an expression they'd never seen before, frustration mixed with determination. She wanted to speak. For the first time in her life, she genuinely wanted to find her voice. That night, she fell asleep clutching her toy garbage truck, her lips still forming silent words in her dreams. The weeks that followed brought subtle but profound changes to the Whitmore household. Emma began carrying around a small notebook that Margaret had given her, making scribbled marks that looked almost like letters. She would show these messages to Daniel every Tuesday, and he would study them with scholarly seriousness, nodding and saying things like, "I see what you mean, Princess. That's a very good point." Charles hired a private investigator to learn more about Daniel Hayes, though he told himself it was just standard security protocol. The report revealed a man of surprising depth. Daniel had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic before returning home to care for his aging mother until her death 3 years ago. He'd chosen garbage collection because it allowed him to work alone, to think, and to serve his community in a quiet way. He lived modestly, volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, and had no criminal record, not even a parking ticket. More importantly, Daniel seemed to understand trauma in ways that the expensive therapists had missed. His gentle approach with Emma wasn't accidental. It was the practiced patience of someone who had comforted wounded soldiers and held dying strangers' hands. He recognized that some injuries were invisible and that healing required safety, not pressure. Margaret began timing her garden work to coincide with Daniel's visits, not to eavesdrop, but to witness the magic that occurred between him and Emma. She watched her daughter's body language transform from the tense politeness she showed most adults to something relaxed and genuinely joyful. Emma would literally skip to the gate on Tuesday mornings, her whole being radiating anticipation. "She's falling in love with words," Margaret told Charles one evening. "Not with speaking yet, but with the idea that words can be beautiful, funny, comforting. He's making language feel safe for her." Charles had begun joining these Tuesday morning encounters more regularly, initially standing awkwardly in his expensive suits, while Daniel worked in his practical overalls. But gradually, he found himself drawn into the conversations. "Emma drew another picture yesterday," Charles mentioned one morning, surprising himself with the casual comment. Daniel paused in his work, genuinely interested. "Oh yeah, what was it this time?" "A cat. We think it might be Chester." Emma nodded enthusiastically, pulling a new drawing from her pocket. This one showed a gray cat sitting in a window, surprisingly detailed for a 6-year-old's artwork. "She's got real talent," Daniel said, admiring the drawing. "Chester would be honored to be drawn by such a famous artist." Charles realized this was the longest non-business conversation he'd had in months, and it felt surprisingly natural. There was something about Daniel's presence that made pretense unnecessary, that encouraged genuine human connection. The pivotal morning arrived without warning on a Tuesday in early November. The air was sharp with approaching winter, and Emma had bundled herself in a pink coat that made her look like a small flower blooming against the gray morning. She carried a new drawing, but this one was different, more detailed, more deliberate. Daniel examined it carefully. The drawing showed 2 stick figures, one large and one small, both smiling. Above them, Emma had carefully written what looked like letters, though they were too shaky to be readable. "This is beautiful, Princess. Can you tell me about these letters up here?" Emma pointed to the marks, then to herself, then to Daniel. Her mouth opened and closed several times, like a fish testing the air. Charles and Margaret held their breath, recognizing the signs of an enormous internal struggle. Daniel seemed to sense the magnitude of the moment. He set down his work completely and gave Emma his full attention, his expression patient and encouraging but completely without pressure. "Take your time," he said softly. "Sometimes the most important things need to grow slowly, like flowers." Emma looked at her drawing, then at Daniel, then back at her drawing. Her small hands gripped the paper so tightly her knuckles turned white. She took a deep breath, the kind that comes before a leap of faith. "Huh," she whispered, the sound barely audible above the morning breeze. Everyone froze. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Emma tried again, her voice slightly stronger. "Hap." Daniel crouched down until he was eye level with her, his face radiating gentle encouragement. "Yes, Princess. I'm listening." "Happy," Emma said, the word emerging clear and perfect and devastating in its simplicity. The world exploded into motion. Margaret covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face. Charles felt his knees buckle, and he had to grip the gate post to remain standing. His daughter had spoken. After 6 years, 4 months, and 12 days of silence, Emma had chosen to share her voice. But Daniel's reaction was perhaps the most beautiful of all. He didn't gasp or cheer or make a big production. He simply smiled, his eyes bright with joy, and said, "Yes, Emma. Happy. That's exactly right." Emma seemed surprised by her own voice, touching her throat with wonder. Then she looked at her parents and said it again, stronger this time. "Happy." Charles stumbled forward. Tears he didn't know he was capable of shedding blurring his vision. "Emma, sweetheart, you spoke. You actually spoke." But Emma wasn't finished. She looked directly at Daniel and, with careful deliberation, said, "Thank you." Daniel's professional composure finally cracked. His eyes filled with tears as he said, "Thank you, Princess Emma. Thank you for trusting me with your first words." Margaret rushed to Emma, sweeping her into her arms, but Emma wiggled free and ran back to Daniel. She threw her small arms around his legs in a fierce hug and whispered into his work pants, "Friend." Charles found himself shaking Daniel's hand with both of his own, unable to articulate the gratitude that threatened to overwhelm him. This man, this quiet hero in orange overalls, had accomplished what all their money and influence could not. He had given them back their daughter's voice. As Daniel prepared to continue his route, Emma called out one more word, her voice growing stronger with each attempt. "Tuesday." Daniel turned back, his smile radiant. "Yes, Princess. I'll see you next Tuesday." As the garbage truck rumbled away, Emma stood between her parents, her hand in each of theirs, and whispered the word that changed everything. Home. For the first time in 6 years, the Whitmore mansion was filled not with silence, but with the sound of hope. The months that followed Emma's first words brought changes to the Whitmore family that reached far deeper than anyone could have imagined. Emma's vocabulary grew slowly but steadily, each new word celebrated like a precious gift. She spoke in whispers at first, as if her voice were something fragile that might break if used too forcefully. But gradually, her confidence grew along with her voice. "Mama," she had whispered to Margaret 3 weeks after her breakthrough, the word delivered like a benediction during a quiet bedtime story. Margaret had cried so hard that Emma had patted her cheek and whispered, "Okay, Mama." Papa came 2 days later, spoken into Charles's ear as he carried her up to bed. The word hit him with the force of a revelation, making him understand for the first time what it truly meant to be a father. Not a provider or protector. Those were roles he'd mastered years ago. But a papa, someone worthy of a daughter's first tentative words of love. Daniel's Tuesday visits became the anchor point around which the entire week revolved. Emma would spend days preparing for their conversations, practicing words with her parents, drawing pictures to share, collecting interesting leaves or stones that she thought might amuse him. Her notebook filled with increasingly sophisticated attempts at writing, stories told in careful pictures and crooked letters. Charles found himself looking forward to these encounters with an enthusiasm that surprised him. He began taking real days off work, not just working from home, but actually disconnecting from his empire to focus on his family. His business partners were shocked when he started declining meeting requests that conflicted with Tuesday mornings. "But sir, the Tokyo deal requires your immediate attention," his assistant had protested during one particularly important negotiation. "Tokyo has waited 3 months for this deal," Charles replied calmly. "They can wait until Tuesday afternoon. I have a prior commitment." Margaret started keeping a journal of Emma's words, documenting each breakthrough with the devotion of a scholar recording miracles. "Blue sky," Emma had said during a walk in the park, pointing upward with wonder. "Pretty flowers," came next, accompanied by gentle touches to Margaret's carefully tended roses. Each phrase was a small victory, evidence that their daughter was finally ready to share her inner world with words. But the most profound changes were in Emma herself. The quiet, watchful child began to blossom into someone more confident, more engaged with the world around her. She still chose her words carefully. Speech remained a precious resource not to be wasted, but when she spoke, everyone listened with the attention usually reserved for prophets. Why was she silent for so long? Charles asked Dr. Chun during one of their follow-up appointments. What changed? Dr. Chun, who had worked with Emma for months without success, studied the little girl who was now whispering to her teddy bear in the corner of the office. Sometimes trauma isn't about what happens to us, but about feeling unheard even when we try to communicate. Emma needed someone who listened with their whole being, not just their ears. Mr. Hayes gave her that gift. The truth of this observation became clear as Emma's personality emerged more fully. She was naturally quiet, preferring to observe and process before speaking. The pressure to talk, from doctors, therapists, even her well-meaning parents, had felt like force rather than invitation. Daniel had simply made space for her voice without demanding it, and in that safe space, she had chosen to bloom. Daniel himself seemed humbled by his role in Emma's transformation. When Charles tried to offer him money as a token of gratitude, Daniel politely declined. "I didn't do anything special," he insisted. "I just treated her like she was already perfect the way she was." Maybe that's all any of us really need, someone who sees us clearly and likes what they see. But Charles wouldn't be deterred. If Daniel wouldn't accept money, then Charles would find other ways to express his gratitude. He arranged for the city to recognize Daniel as Employee of the Month, then Employee of the Year. He quietly funded improvements to the sanitation department's equipment and working conditions. He even established a scholarship in Daniel's name for the children of city workers. Emma's relationship with Daniel continued to evolve as her confidence grew. Their Tuesday conversations became more complex, covering everything from the changing seasons to Emma's thoughts about books and movies. Daniel treated her observations with the same respect he would give an adult, never condescending or dismissing her ideas. "Mr. Daniel," Emma said one morning in the spring, her voice now clear and strong, "why do people throw away good things?" Daniel paused in his work, considering the question seriously. "Well, Princess, sometimes people can't see the good in things anymore. Or maybe they're too busy to remember why something was important to them." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Like how I forgot my words until you helped me remember?" "Maybe," Daniel said gently. "Or maybe you just needed someone to help you feel brave enough to share them." Charles, overhearing this exchange, felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Emma's wisdom, emerging through her careful words, continually amazed him. She saw connections that adults missed, understood emotions with a clarity that came from her years of silent observation. The transformation extended beyond Emma to the entire family structure. Charles began coming home earlier, eager to hear about Emma's day, to share meals together, to read bedtime stories that were now interactive adventures full of Emma's questions and comments. Margaret found herself laughing more, the lines of worry around her eyes softening as joy replaced anxiety. They became, for the first time since Emma's birth, a truly connected family. Not perfect, they still had challenges, disagreements, moments of frustration, but authentic in a way that all their wealth had never been able to purchase. On a warm Tuesday morning in May, exactly 1 year after Emma's first word, she surprised everyone with an announcement that demonstrated just how much she had grown. "I want to help Mr. Daniel," she declared, her voice confident and clear. "People throw away good things, but maybe we can save them." Charles and Margaret exchanged glances, recognizing the determination in their daughter's eyes, the same focus she had once brought to freeing butterflies from spider webs. "What did you have in mind, sweetheart?" Margaret asked. Emma had clearly thought this through. "We can make a place for good things that people don't want anymore. Then other people who need them could have them." And so began the Emma Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to rescuing and redistributing discarded items that still had value. Charles provided the funding and business expertise. Margaret handled the administrative details. But Emma was the heart and vision of the operation, the little girl who had learned from a garbage collector that one person's trash truly could be another person's treasure. Daniel was hired as the foundation's first official consultant, his years of experience giving him unique insight into what people threw away and what could be salvaged. He worked part-time with the foundation while keeping his city route, becoming a bridge between the world of waste and the world of possibility. 2 years later, the Emma Foundation had grown into a citywide operation, with Emma, now 8 years old and beautifully articulate, serving as its youngest and most effective spokesperson. Her speeches at fundraising events, delivered in her clear, careful voice, moved audiences to tears, and opened wallets with equal effectiveness. Some things seem broken, she would tell crowds of wealthy donors, but they just need someone to see them differently, someone to believe they're worth saving. Charles would watch his daughter from the back of the room, marveling at her transformation from silent child to eloquent advocate. She had found her voice, but more than that, she had found her purpose: to help others discover the value in things that seemed lost or forgotten. On quiet evenings, when the foundation's work was done and Emma was safely asleep, Charles would sit with Margaret on their porch, watching the lights of their city twinkle in the distance. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Emma had never met Daniel? Margaret asked one such evening. Charles considered the question, then shook his head. I think somehow, someway, she would have found her voice. She was never really broken. She was just waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right reason to share what was inside her all along. Margaret smiled, taking his hand. And what about us? Were we broken? Charles squeezed her fingers gently. No, we were just parents who needed to learn how to listen. Emma taught us that love isn't about fixing people. It's about accepting them so completely that they feel safe enough to become who they're meant to be. Inside the house, Emma slept peacefully, her dreams filled with Tuesday mornings, gentle voices, and the endless possibility that tomorrow might bring new words, new friends, and new chances to help heal a world that sometimes forgot the value of quiet voices and patient hearts. In her nightstand drawer, carefully preserved between the pages of her favorite book, lay a drawing of two stick figures, one tall in orange overalls, one small in a pink dress, standing together under a sun that shone so brightly it illuminated everything around them with hope.